Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. If you're a gardener, you need to know exactly how to water clay soil. As America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, told us recently, that is a story all unto itself. Today, we hear that story from Debbie, along with a lot of clay soil-related scenic bypasses, including how to dig a hole for a plant. It's not as simple as you might think. Also, why you don't want to rototill clay garden soil, and the importance of garden pathways, especially in a garden filled with clay. It's all today in episode 339. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, how to water clay soil, and more tips for gardening in clay. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. You may recall a few weeks ago we were talking about cucumbers with America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower. And we were talking how to plant cucumbers, how to care for them. And she mentioned that irrigation and drainage are very important to the happiness of cucumbers. But she had a warning for us. And this is what she said back in that episode about cucumbers and clay soil.
So I totally support starting them from seed. Know where you're going to grow them. They need full sun. So you have to have a place to have full sun and well-drained soil, no puddling there, and some organic matter in the soil. You can grow them in clay. You can grow a lot of things in clay, but you better have, or at least mulch with organic material. And over time, that organic material will become incorporated into the clay and you'll have improved soil. Watering clay soil correctly is a whole nother story. So just be aware that you're going to have to pay attention to that.
Oh, Debbie Flower, tell us that story, would you please?
You ready?
Yeah.
You snug as a bug in your pajamas and ready for your nighttime story?
Once upon a time, I had clay soil.
Yeah, and many people do. And it's actually very wonderful gardening soil if it's treated correctly. So as I said, mulch it regularly, even if there's nothing planted there. Soil types, sand, silt, and clay, are defined strictly by the size of the particle. The biggest particle is sand, and it has quite a large range of sizes it can be, but the biggest particles in soil are sand. Then silt is the intermediate size, and clay is the tiniest particles. And if you ever worked in a soil lab or visited a soil lab, they have a series of sieves that have different size holes in the bottom of them, and that's how they wash soil through, goes through the big holes first, and the holes get smaller and smaller and smaller till you're at the bottom of this stack of probably 8 or 9 different sized holes in the bottom of the sieves till you get to the bottom. And what's in the bottom will be clay because it goes through the smallest of holes. When you have clay and it's in a very small particle, you can pack a whole lot of those particles together in a small space. Let's say you were to fill up a small juice glass with clay. You would have, let's say, 10,000 particles. If you were to fill that same juice glass with sand, you might have 100 particles. The difference in size is quite amazing.
We'll have a link in today's show notes that shows a good example of 3 beakers full of what looks like soil, except one is sand, the other is silt, and one is clay. But they're all in the same beaker because they migrate to different levels inside that container.
A traditional way of checking your texture of soil, and we're talking about texture, whether it is sandy, silty, or clayey, is to get a nice jar, like a mayonnaise jar, a quart jar, and dig down, take everything off the surface of the soil, take the mulch away. You want to be down probably 6 inches where the roots would grow, and take a cup or two. So you want to fill put it in that quart jar and not have it go above the halfway point. Add just a drop of liquid dish soap, and fill it up to the shoulders, so just below the mouth of the jar, with water. And then you shake for 10 minutes.
So put a lid on first.
Oh, yeah. Good idea. Yes, you want it to have a tight-fitting lid. We used to do this in class, and we would time it 10 minutes. Everybody get up and walk around. You want to shake it upside down. You want to shake it upright, play some music, dance to it, but shake this jar. And then turn it over and set it down onto a counter and watch it. The first thing that's going to fall out is the sand, because it's the biggest particle and it's the heaviest particle, and it falls to the bottom. And you'll get a layer, and then you'll be able to see the differences in the particles, where one clay particle ends and another clay particle begins. Then you'll get some silt, and on the very top is the clay, and the clay can take days to settle depending on how small it is. If you have very cloudy water, then there's a lot of clay left to settle, and you may have to walk away from it and come back later. And then you measure the layers and come up with percentages. Let's say you have 15% sand and 25% silt. What's that leave you with?
60.
A lot of clay.
A lot of clay.
Anything over about 30% of clay, you have clay soil. So clay is very small particles, and as such, each particle has a large surface area. Like, think of a penny compared to a $50. For the size, there's a lot of surface area on that penny compared to that on the $50. Water travels in soil by running along the edge of the soil particles. It sticks to the edge of the soil particles. And so if you have lots of surface area, it holds lots of water. So moral of that story is clay holds lots of water. The water also travels slowly through clay because it takes quite a while to coat each particle with water, which is how water moves in soil. It coats each particle as it moves up, down, and to the sides. So when you're watering a garden that is growing in clay, you're putting water on faster than it can be absorbed into the clay, and you will get puddling. So you need to irrigate in what's called surge irrigation. A good amount of water, on average, in a garden is 1 inch per week. Of course, that's going to vary, but if you have no idea how much to put on, 1 inch per week is great. Get out some cans, lay them across the garden, turn on the water, and see how much you can get on that garden before you create a puddle. And keep track of the time. Let's say you turn on the sprinkler, and after 10 minutes you get a puddle. Turn them off. Turn the sprinkler off, turn it off for 10 minutes. That should allow the puddle to enter the soil. Maybe you got 1/4 of an inch of water on there. Then you're going to turn it back on for another 10 minutes, probably. Again, watch for the puddle, keep track of the time. Let's say it worked that way. You had another 10 minutes, you got another 1/4 inch in the can, and then you have to turn the water off until it soaks into the soil. Let's say it took 15 minutes to soak in. So then you turn it on again for 10 more minutes, get another puddle, turn it off, let it soak in. So you're surging the water. You're putting it on and stopping, putting it on and stopping, putting it on and stopping. That's how you have to water clay soil. Then you don't need to water again for a long, long time. Good to have a way to check that. We've talked about moisture meters. We've talked about taking a long stick and pushing it down through the soil. It will go easily through the soil that is wet, and when it comes to a dry place, it will slow down. Using a long stick that will show you the water. So like a screwdriver.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was waiting for the word screwdriver. I had my vodka and orange juice ready to go.
And when you pull it out, you'll be able to see the mark where it's still wet. You'll be able to see how deep it is, the wetness is. And of course, you can dig a hole and look down there. And the plants will give you clues. Are they wilting or are they standing up? So with clay soil, it takes a longer time to put the water on because the particle sizes are small, but it holds a lot of water in the root zone, and you don't have to irrigate as frequently.
We should point out that when you're doing the can test, that all the cans should be the same size. Like all tuna fish cans or all cat food cans, all
Yes.
the same size.
Yes.
You can buy professional measuring cups to do this that you stick in the soil, and they're graduated on the side as far as depths go, so you can more easily determine.
Sort of like a rain gauge, but
Like
one
a
that
rain
you would
gauge,
put in the soil.
Yeah, right. It looks kind of funny having all these funnels stuck in your soil. But and it works like a charm. It's also good for helping to figure out if you're using a sprinkler system, if you're getting equal coverage throughout your entire lawn, for example.
Sprinklers are interesting that way, whether you're using a permanent system that has hose supply lines and emitters that you leave in the ground year round, or you're using one on the end of the hose. They drop very little water right at the place that the water comes out. The water sprays a distance. And so if you want water where you have set that sprinkler, where the emitter is in the drip line or the micro spray line, or where the device is at the end of the hose that lets the water out, you have to have another sprinkler someplace else that throws water in that direction.
Mm-hmm. They should overlap by, 50%?
I like head-to-head coverage.
Oh, okay. All right.
Meaning that the water from one sprinkler will land at where the other emitter is.
You didn't mention the most fun parts about having clay soil.
You want to test it in your hand?
Well, no, I was thinking in the wintertime, it's so muddy, you get your car tires stuck in it and you need to get towed out. Or in the summertime, if you go to dig, you can't even get through it with a pickaxe. And the only way you can dig a hole in the summertime in clay soil is to literally pickaxe out an inch or so, as much as you can do, fill it full of water, come back tomorrow, and then take another inch out.
Yes. It's tedious stuff. And so to improve that, that's where the organic matter comes in. Organic matter solves all soil problems. You lay it on the surface over and over and over again so that it breaks down by the natural processes in the environment and the life in your soil. And over time, it becomes mixed with the clay. Do not mix sand into clay soil. We live in the West here where there are those missions, and those missions are made from, in many cases, adobe. And guess what adobe's made from?
Clay and sand?
Clay and sand, okay. Yes. And then it dries in the sun and you get adobe, which is like concrete. To improve clay soil, add organic matter on the surface and let nature do its thing. I had a professor at Rutgers, which is where I got my bachelor's degree in plant science with a horticulture specialization. I've told this story before, so if you've heard it, you can go do something else for a minute. At the time, he attended Rutgers also, and at the time he was a student. A place where students lived were the old World War II barracks, and they were not landscaped. It was just a bunch of buildings in the middle of a field. And his job to make money so he could go to college was in the animal lab, and he had to clean out the rat cages. And he collected what was in the bottom of those rat cages. So that's some sort of organic bedding and pee and poop from the animal. Brought it home and put it on the soil outside of his, where he was living, one of these barracks. And by the time he graduated, it was clay when he started. He couldn't dig in it. As Fred said, the pick, and most college students don't have a pick with them in their dorm room. But by the time he got his degree, the 4 years later, he could plunge his hand into that soil, no problem.
Yeah, I'd be suspicious of any college student who brought a pickaxe with them into the dorm room.
I'd be worried.
Yeah, I'd be worried too. Yeah. But yeah, it could be mulch too. You could, in the fall, when the leaves fall, you could spread those around too.
Exactly. That's the perfect mulch. You can use that. You can use the arborist chips. You can chip your own, whatever it is you're pruning that day. You can make your own compost and put that on. But just putting mulch on the soil, your grass clippings, although you have to do that in very thin layers, because grass clippings, when they overlap, will mat. They'll stick together. They get sort of slimy, and then they stick together, and then water will not penetrate through there. Any kind of organic matter on the soil, on the surface, as mulch. Okay, mulch means on the surface. So any kind of organic matter on the surface and just left, and over the winter is a wonderful time to add mulch.
I would be leery of using Bermuda grass for that.
Well,
purpose.
That's true. And you don't want to use weeds that have seeds in them or reproduce from the stems like Bermuda grass does.
Right. Yeah, it's it can cause trouble. In the
sure
long
can.
Run. Yeah, and mulch, as you've pointed out on this program many times, the fact that if you have 3 or 4 inches of mulch on top of the soil, it's going to break the force of the rain coming down, or if you have sprinklers, the force of that water coming down.
Yes.
So that it's more slowly going to percolate into the soil, and if you have clay soil, it's going to get further into the soil before you get runoff.
Right, and water droplets flying through the air are very powerful and can cause soil compaction. So it can cause those clay particles, which are already small and close together, to get even smaller or closer together for sure, and get rid of the spaces between them. And that makes it even harder to garden in that area, which is why at the beginning I said put mulch on all clay soil all the time, even if you're not gardening there, because you want to prevent that from happening so you have options in your future.
And avoid walking on wet soil, especially if it's clay.
Yeah. Unless you've created paths, but then put mulch on top to help distribute your weight.
Yeah, that goes into garden design, that if you're just laying out a garden for the first time and you have clay soil, put in 4-foot wide pathways for you and your wheelbarrow to be able to reach all points in the garden. So that means your garden beds would probably be no more than 4 feet wide, along with a 4-foot walkway on either side.
Or in a wilder garden, which is how I garden, I call it the gardener's path. People who are not gardeners don't see the path. But those of us who work it every day take that path. It's the same path all the time. When I walk through it, if something's growing in the path, I pull it or I prune it so that I have, and they're only maybe a foot wide.
Yeah, sort of like mountain bike paths.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I'm pretty picky about who I allow to advertise on this podcast. My criteria, though, is pretty simple. It has to be a product I like, a product I use, and a product I would buy again. And you know who checks all those boxes? It's Smart Pots. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Smart Pots are sold around the world, and they're proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes and colors and can be reused year after year. Some models even have handles, and that makes them a lot easier to move around the yard. Because the fabric breathes, Smart Pots are better suited than plastic pots, especially for hot climates. That breathable fabric has other benefits too. Water drainage issues? Not with Smart Pots. Roots that go round and round choking the root ball like they do in plastic pots? Doesn't happen with Smart Pots. These benefits will help you get a bigger, better plant than what you've gotten in the past with the same size plastic or other hard container. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers as well as select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how for a limited time you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED. F-R-E-D. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. We're talking clay soil today, how to water it, how to plant in it, how to care for it. We're with Debbie Flower, America's favorite retired college horticultural professor. Let's keep going. Yeah, mulch does a world of good, and especially with clay soil. And I'm sure that you would dissuade people, too, from, if they're planting in clay soil, of using a good expensive potting mix and using that in the hole instead.
No, all that does is containerize your plant in the ground. Water takes the path of least resistance. So you buy a plant, you dig a hole. Let's say you do amend the soil. So amend means mix in. Mulch means lay on top. Amend means mix in. Landscapers will very often, if you hire someone, they will very often amend the soil they put back into the hole. I suspect it's because they can charge you for what they're mixing in. They can make money off of you, or they think it's right, or they think that's what you want. So you got to be in control of the situation if you have someone else who's planting the plant. But if you do amend the soil, meaning you mix a whole bunch of that bagged whatever into the field soil and put it back in the hole, then the plant is living in just a bigger pot in the ground. The water will take the path of least resistance. So when you water the plant with the amended soil, the water will stay in that hole for a long time. It takes a long time for water to soak into clay. So the water will go through to the bottom of the water area you've amended and sit there and take a long time to leave that area. That leads to saturation. Saturation leads to lack of oxygen, and you start getting rotting. And chemicals that are produced in rotting organic matter in soil are actually bad for plants. And so you can kill your plant that way. It's much better to just put the plant, yes, it came in some kind of container media, which is pretty much organic matter. Dig a hole slightly less deep than the root ball and 2 to 3 times as wide. Set the plant, cut the roots, take it out of the pot, gently pour it out of the pot. Slice the roots just on the surface, around the outside and across the bottom. Set it down so the roots are on the bottom of the hole. If there are roots hanging out after you've cut them off or spread them out. Don't leave them curled under the plant. Then put the field soil back in around the plant. The plant should stick out 1/2 inch, 2 inches, depending on how big it was, what size container it was in, and then mulch on top. And the mulch will become organic matter and move into the soil, but you have not changed the texture of the soil around that plant. But you have to tend that plant very carefully now because it is all the roots are in a different media than your field soil. So you have to water that plant as needed. In a hot, dry summer like we have in California, that's daily. And it takes 6 weeks approximately for the roots. Shrub, this was part of my master's thesis. It takes 6 weeks, approximately 6 weeks for the roots of a shrub grown in a number 1 to grow into the field soil. Then you can lay off of the potential daily watering of your new plant. So it's going to be watering as needed to the plant itself and once a week to the field soil around it.
Is there any truth to the oft-repeated advice of after you've dug a hole with a shovel, the sides of that hole may actually be, if you will, cemented over due to the backside of the shovel, and you should make some indentations or somehow loosen up the sides of that hole to allow the roots to better penetrate the outer layer?
Yes, absolutely. That is true, especially in a clay soil, because it becomes slick. You've pressed against that clay soil to push those particles together, and you've made an artificial wall. So absolutely go at it with a 3-pronged tiller or just the side of the shovel or the tip of the shovel and just make some indents. Give the roots a place to catch.
Well, you mentioned the word tiller, so let's bring up that subject because I can see what some of you people are thinking at home because we are in the 21st century and I do have artificial intelligence. And what you're thinking now is, well, what if I buy some really nice soil, spread it out evenly on top of the entire garden and rototill it all in? Wouldn't that make everything better? Well, except the blades of that rototiller would actually be creating that slick layer on the bottom as deep as those tiller blades can go, and you still have some water penetration issues.
Right. When a yard is initially landscaped, very often they do bring in a layer of good soil, quote unquote. It's typically some field soil harvested somewhere else and then mixed with some organic matter. And then they lay it on top and mix it in using a power tiller and then lay sod on top. And it has some benefit, but it has its own problems too.
Yeah, rototilling does create those artificial barriers,
right?
Like I mentioned. And if there was a time to use a rototiller, it might be at that initial planting. If you build a house on what was previously unlived on land before and you wanted to start a garden, maybe doing it once with the amendments, you can get away with it.
Right. If you do it over and over and over again, we found this out by looking at field soil that was tilled for, was farmed for generations, maybe just for decades, either one. It breaks up the soil particles. Soil creates what are called aggregates, where soil particles stick to soil particles. And clay is really good at making aggregates. So clay particles stick to clay particles in an irregular arrangement. And that creates bigger holes between those particles that are stuck in that, what's called an aggregate. The soil can store water and air in that aggregate, and it makes really nice gardening soil. Makes it easier for the water to go in, and it makes it easier for the air to come in. It dries out more quickly, but this happens over time, and the glue that makes this happen is the poop of the things that eat the organic matter that you've put on the surface as mulch. So you have to be patient. Gardening is always an exercise in patience. If you till regularly, you're breaking up those aggregates. You're destroying the structure of the soil. And those very fine particles that result wash down to the bottom of wherever you irrigate. If you grow the same crop over and over again, you irrigate to the same depth, maybe a foot, then the bottom of that, where that irrigation goes, is going to be full of tiny clay particles, and you will end up with a layer that the water will take forever to get through, and you have a perched water table. So you've created a bigger problem, and it's down lower, and it's going to be harder to take care of.
Are you thinking of growing fruit trees? Maybe you already are, but you'll want to know more about them. Well, you probably have a million questions, like which fruit trees will grow where I live? What are the tastiest fruits? When's harvest time? How do I care for these trees? The good news is the answers are all nearby. Just go to davewilson.com, click on the Home Garden tab at the top of the page. And in that Home Garden tab, you're going to find a link to their fruit and nut harvest chart so you can be picking delicious, healthy fruits from your own yard for a long growing season. Here in USDA Zone 9, that could be May through December. And you're just a click away with the informative YouTube video series at davewilson.com. As part of that video series, they'll walk you through the simple process of using the Dave Wilson website to find their trees either at a nearby local nursery or at a mail order source. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest grower of fruit trees for the backyard garden. They've got planting tips, taste test results, and information about their revolutionary backyard orchard culture techniques. That'll explain how you can have a cornucopia of different fruit trees in a small backyard. Your harvest to better health begins at davewilson.com. So we started off talking about how to water clay soil. Well, we've taken many scenic bypasses about clay soil and how to treat it right. So let's keep going with America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower. The other thing you can also do to improve clay soil would be, in the off-season, would be planting a cover crop.
Cover crops are planted for specific reasons. I love the Peaceful Valley Farm Supply has a lot of information on their website about cover crops. So you want one that goes deep. Alfalfa is an example of something that has a deep root to penetrate through the layers, break it up. Water will follow the root and it will go deeper. You don't need water to go real deep. You don't need it to go below the root zone of the plant. It doesn't do any good down there, but it will help break up the soil and it will add organic matter. So if you just want to add organic matter, you use some sort of a grass, oat, or their annual rye. You want it to be an annual. Anyway, there's a lot of information you can get about cover crops, but cover crops do add organic matter and help break up soil.
We'll have that link at Peaceful Valley Farm Supply in today's show notes where you can read all about cover crops. And there's also the growing practice among gardeners of basically leaving the root matter of whatever you grew the previous season and just snipping off the top, letting those roots stay in the soil over the winter where they'll break down and maintain those air pockets.
Right.
So
they become organic matter.
Right. So there's a lot of good ways. It seems odd to say, but you can't see it. But air is a very important part of soil.
It is. Roots need air. Air is used by probably all the cells in the plant. It's never good to say all in horticulture, but for respiration, for breaking down the food packets that are stored in that part of the plant to release the nutrients so the plant, release the plant food actually, so the plant can do the next thing. So plants make food by mixing the sun with the water and other things in the plant, and they make food packets. And you've heard the saying, make hay while the sun shines. Well, that's what they're doing. They bale it, basically, make it into a packet and store it somewhere. They store almost everywhere. Stems, leaves, roots. Fruit, that's how fruit gets sweet. And then when it's needed, the plant's been pruned and now it has to do a whole lot of growth. So it breaks down a whole lot of food packets and uses that to make the new growth. So roots do a lot of respiration. They don't do photosynthesis. They're not above the ground. They don't turn green. They don't have the ability to make food. They do have the ability to absorb water and whatever's dissolved in it. And they do store a lot of these food packets that the plant makes above ground, below ground. But in order to break them down and make them available to the plant, they need oxygen for the process of respiration, which does that.
There's a farm advisor for the University of California in Central California who has been urging farmers to adopt cover cropping and no-till practices on the farms. And he had a lot of volunteer farmers who would dedicate a certain amount of acreage to this practice. Turns out with no-till and cover cropping, you can grow more crops when it's time to grow more crops more densely. And one of his best demonstrations of that was to bring out farmers to one of these demonstration plots that has been done with no-till and cover cropping adjacent to a typical farm lot that has been used with synthetic fertilizers and basically everything you normally do in farming. And he would just have the farmers, first of all, walk on the traditional farm soil. It's as hard as a rock. It's like walking on asphalt. You go over to the no-till and cover cropping section, and they all described it as walking on a bed mattress. It was soft. And he said, well, that's because there's air in there. Mm-hmm. And that explains in part why crop production is so much greater on that portion of this field.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I'm so glad somebody's doing that and showing the results.
Yeah, in a very practical way,
yes.
too. Well, I mean, for farmers, the practical is, okay, let me see your bank statement, your bank balance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. For the moment, not looking ahead.
Yeah.
It's been proven that, at least it was a UC study, I believe. So in California, growing vetch, which is a nitrogen-fixing crop, as a cover crop, it's a vine, and it has little purple flowers. Growing that as a cover crop, you get better growth of tomatoes in that area. And you don't even have to pull out the vetch. You just plant the tomatoes among the vetch.
Have you ever tried pulling out vetch?
I know, it's a pain.
Yes, it's a rather viney crop.
It is. And it has tendrils, so it ties to each other.
Yes, and gets all clogged up in your rototiller.
Right, so you don't do that. You just go through and snip off the top, leave like what you were saying, the bottom of the plant, and plant your tomatoes in when it's time.
One of the radio names I considered using over the years was Harry Vetch. But I never did. That's okay. I think I settled for Sam Joaquin. What was the original question?
Talking about watering clay.
Oh, that's right. Well, you see, we take the scenic bypasses here. Thank you for joining us on our little trip here. Debbie Flower, thanks for your help.
You're welcome, Fred.
Okay, here's your garden to-do list for the day. Spend some quiet time in the yard. Walk, converse, smell, and touch all your plants. Enjoy the texture, the aromas, the color combinations, the structure. Admire the naturally amazing artwork of plant leaves. Check both sides of those leaves for eggs or insects. And if you're checking for eggs or bugs on your plant, make sure that they're the bad guys and not the good guys before you shoo them away. Take a seat out there. Watch and listen to the visitors to your yard, from insects to birds to four-footed creatures, some of whom may be of dubious benefit. And if you would please, help spread the word to your gardening friends and family about the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. Leave a thumbs up or a comment on the show at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can do that at our homepage as well, gardenbasics.net. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, leave a comment, share, and a thumbs up as well at the newsletter Beyond the Garden Basics. It's on Substack. You can find a link to all of these in today's show notes. And as always, thanks for listening. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.